Look, I'm very optimistic, and it is both for structural and for cyclical reasons. And, let's get the cyclical stuff out of the way. There was obviously in 2014 quite a bit of volatility in economic activity because of the hike in the consumption tax. And so you get some front loading and then you get some payback. The cyclical stuff, that's always going to be in the news highlights. There's been some ups, there's been some downs, but the underlying structural improvement, that's, I think, what you should not lose track of. Two fundamental forces at work, that make me very optimistic on a structural, long-lived upcycle here in Japan. And most importantly, we've got a very tight labor market. The unemployment rate continues to fall. The participation rate is beginning to increase, which is to say that people who previously thought they couldn't find a job are actually coming out of retirement or out of unemployment and are actually getting jobs. Look, you've got in Japan, sort of dichotomy of economies. You've got an industrial sector that is world-class. They are very global, they are very competitive, whether it is the car industry, whether it is the chemicals industry, whether it's the shipbuilding industry, whether it is the spindle motor industry. They are top tier and can compete anywhere in the world, and they have been doing so. The interesting thing, what you really should be focused on is not the manufacturing sector, it is the domestic sector, it is the domestic service economy. And whether that is, tourism, whether that is creature comforts for the aging society, whether that is the pharmaceuticals industry, whether that is, the domestic travel industry, it is creature comforts, right? That's the domestic demand cycle that is coming through. And I think global corporations have a phenomenal opportunity here. Just look at who runs all the successful hotels here in Japan. These are all multinational chains, and over the last 5 years, Tokyo alone just got about 6 5-star restaurants coming into the area, and they all have occupancy ratios in excess of 95%. When people look at Japan, when the world looks at Japan, in many ways they're still looking at the old Japan. They think that, oh my God, you've got the consumer electronics industry and that used to be great, but now it's second or third rate. Well, outside of the consumer electronics industry, I beg you, find me one industry where Japan has lost competitive edge. I cannot find anyone, whether it is shipbuilding, whether it is steel, whether it is chemicals, whether it is, components, you name it, the Japanese continue to be world class. But what is exciting is that the domestic service economy, that was hit very hard by the collapse of the bubble economy, by the legacy of asset deflation, by huge negative wealth effects as real estate prices collapsed, right? Now that is over. And the strongest data point I can give you is quite amazing. Japan, 44% of all Japanese over the age of 20 have no debt. There is no credit card debt, there is no mortgage debt, there is no student loans, but those 44% own fair and square the home that they live in. It is an unbelievably rich country, and seeing those riches turned into purchasing power, that's where the domestic Japan story is going to give you great opportunities. The biggest challenge is actually also the biggest opportunity for global multinational corporations, and that is Japan is running out of labor. I mean, you've got to look at the statistics. You find that the number of people between 25 and 35 is going to drop by 231,000 every year between now and the Tokyo Olympics in 2020. So you're losing young talent. And as a result of that, what you find is that Japan's multinationals are beginning to hire global talent. So you are beginning to see Japanese multinationals really beginning to internationalize their global workforce. They're beginning to hire engineers, and it is driven primarily by the economic necessity. They just don't make young Japanese anymore. Now what is happening is that Japanese companies themselves have to open up. And they have to open up because the domestic talent pool is beginning to shrink. And at the same time, the markets for many of the Japanese corporations increasingly is going to be outside of Japan. So you've got the combination, you've got this scissor going where domestic talent is shrinking because of the population dynamics. At the same time, global markets are the biggest opportunities. So it's a match made in heaven for global engineers, for global mid-level managers. And the challenge is, how do Japanese corporations, how do Japanese companies change their corporate culture? Now that you're going to have to open up, you're going to have to implement strategies to deploy human capital more effectively. So pay for performance is starting to be introduced, and that of course opens up for global talent, and of course it also opens up Japanese corporations for female talent. The thing about Japanese financial services is that Japanese banks are back. I mean, these banks have merged and consolidated. It was a painful process that took almost one generation. But when I look at the capital ratios, when I look at the bottom line profit generation power that the three mega banks actually bring to the table, you stand in awe. Right? These are very powerful institutions, extremely well capitalized, also with a fantastic governance system in terms of the financial regulators, right? Also having become transparent, also having consolidated. So the number one issue about the financial services opportunity in the 1980s, when we had the bubble, Japan was easy pickings. In the 1990s, Japan was easy picking for global corporations because the local competition was just very, very weak. Now, in 2014, the Japanese banks, the Japanese investment bank, the Japanese asset managers are real competitive forces to reckon with. And this whole issue of reforming the GPIF, reforming the government pension fund, which is one of the world's largest pools of pension assets, the fact that they want to bring this institution into the 21st century, that's where enormous opportunities lie, right? Because that's the one part, the asset management industry is the one industry in financial services where the Japanese have still, a lot of catching up to do. But I reckon that with this top-down approach that Prime Minister Abe and his team is taking, reforming the government pension fund with top priority, that, I think, tells me that we're actually getting into a turbocharging of catching up.